In a world that feels like it's specifically designed to shatter our attention, how do you actually get anything done? Today, we're going to look at a pretty cool technique for finding focus. Not by trying harder, but by thinking about attention in a totally new way. So let me ask you this. You sit down to do something important, and within minutes, your mind is a million miles away. It's a struggle we all know, right? But what if the answer isn't to fight that wandering mind, but to actually work with it? Okay, so let's get right into it. The first thing we need to do is kind of challenge this idea that most of us have about what it really takes to be effective. I know we've all been told that to succeed, you need 100% laser beam focus on whatever you're doing. But here's the thing. Our brains, they just don't work like that. I mean, even when you're driving in crazy traffic, part of your mind can drift off. Trying to fight that is just plain exhausting, and let's be honest, it's a losing battle most of the time. This is where things get really interesting. There's this technique from yogic tradition called Tanmaya Dhyanam, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's super powerful. The easiest way to think of it is as the 90-10 rule for your attention. Now, to really get what this is, it helps to first see what it isn't. Some kinds of meditation, like one called Ishritas Dilai Dhyanam, are all about putting 100% of your focus inward, on yourself. That's great for moments of total stillness. But Tanmaya Dhyanam is different. It's built for an active life. The whole idea is to split your attention. A massive 90% stays anchored inside you, while only a tiny 10% is pointed out at whatever you're doing. So picture this, right? The biggest piece of the pie, that huge 90% of your awareness, it isn't even on your work. Nope, that's your anchor. It's planted right inside your sense of self. And all you need is that little 10% slice to deal with everything happening in the outside world. So what does this actually mean? Well, Tanmaya Dhyanam is basically a state of active meditation. And when we say self-centered, don't get the wrong idea. It just means your center of gravity, your core awareness, is anchored inside of you, even while you're writing an email, driving your car, or listening to someone talk. I know this might still sound a little out there. So let's use a really cool analogy to make this super clear and easy to remember. The stable bank and the rushing river. Just imagine for a second that all of life's demands, your to-do list, your worries, the constant flood of information, is a powerful, chaotic, rushing river. Now your inner self, that quiet, constant feeling of just being, that is the solid, unmoving riverbank. The whole technique is to just, metaphorically, sit firmly on that stable bank. This is where you put 90% of your awareness. And from that place of stability, you can just dip your hand in the water, using only that little 10% of attention to deal with the river of life. And this right here, this is the key. Because if you just jump headfirst into that chaotic river, giving it all of your attention, you're going to get swept away by the currents. You'll be totally at the mercy of every distraction, every crisis. But by staying anchored on the bank, you are the one in control. You can interact with the water, but you don't get consumed by it. Okay, so this all sounds good in theory, right? But how does it actually work in the real world? Theory is one thing, so let's look at a couple of stories from people who've actually used this when things got tough. Let's start with a really powerful one. There was this man who had been practicing this technique, and then suddenly he was faced with one of the most emotionally devastating things a person can go through. And this is what he said about it later. He said, "Because I learned this meditation, I was able to handle everything with a steady mind. Without it, I would have struggled." Think about that. By keeping that 90% of his awareness anchored inside, he was able to navigate the immense grief and all the practical things that followed without being completely shattered. Okay, now for a totally different kind of story, but one that I think a lot of us can relate to in some way. It's about a motorcyclist who used to be just full of fear and hesitation when he was riding, constantly worried about what could go wrong. But after he started applying this 90-10 rule, it changed everything. He said, "Now there is no hesitation. It feels safe, like I am securely seated." See what he did there? He anchored his awareness in that feeling of being securely seated. That's his stable riverbank, and then used only the necessary 10% to focus on the road, which was his rushing river. So what we're seeing here is that this technique does way more than just help with focus. It creates this profound shift in perspective, turning what feels like an overwhelming problem into something much more manageable, a challenge. And what's the difference? Well, a problem feels psychological, right? It gets you stuck in that loop of, why is this happening to me? And it just drains your energy with panic and angst. But a challenge, on the other hand, is practical. The question isn't why, it's, okay, what needs to be done? It focuses your energy on taking action and finding solutions. And really, that's the ultimate payoff. By anchoring your awareness inside, you create enough internal stability to step out of the emotional chaos of the problem. You stop being overwhelmed, and you start dealing with the reality of the situation as a practical challenge that you can actually meet. All right, so let's recap the key takeaways here. True sustainable focus isn't about giving 100% of your attention to the outside world. Instead, the key is to anchor the huge majority, that 90% of your awareness, in your inner self. Then you just use the remaining 10% to engage with any task. This creates a steady mind, it cuts down on mistakes and panic, and most importantly, it reframes overwhelming emotional problems into practical, solvable challenges. You know, the practice itself is simple, but its effects can be profound. It all comes down to a single choice you can make in any given moment. So the question I'll leave you with is this. In the very next thing you do today, where will you place your attention?